Hey everybody, I tried to do live, but apparently I just need to do a YouTube because Facebook doesn't like when I try to go live. So I found out some major information today. This regards the state of North Carolina, but if it's happening here, it's happening a lot of other places, which obviously a lot of the moms are having a lot of the same horrible nightmares, and I'm willing to bet that this is also happening in other places as well. So I had already figured out that it was some kind of a scam by the Children's Law Center, Iris Sunshine, Judge Gordon Miller, some other judges, affiliates, DSS, Victor Eisler, and I wasn't the only one that figured this out. There was a mom before me, and the investigative reporter, I saw his video on YouTube, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's the same thing. So I just want to let and tell any other moms that have been involved in, getting their story out there and making big moves and doing everything you can to protect your children. No matter which of us says what or finds what, we have equally we've all put in so much work to do this together. So we are one. It is not just one person. It's all of us collectively. I just have an extra bit of motivation because I'm so concerned for my baby's safety and well-being. So I'm just doing whatever I possibly can. Using the agencies and systems is an absolute joke and a nightmare, and I'm not playing the games anymore. We're not going to put my baby's life in people's hands that don't follow any laws, federal or state, and are committing fraud and exploiting children and abusing children and doing all these other things just to collect off of it. So I don't have any respect for these people whatsoever. The list of people, honestly, it kind of grows. I'd like to think that not all of these people were aware, but it's very hard to believe that all these attorneys and all these judges just don't know what's going on. I think a lot of them do, and they're ashamed, and they don't want to be a part of it. And that's not for all of them. I say they. I know that there's harm doers and there's people that want to make a change. So for the people that want to make a change and don't want to live in a system or work in a court system and advocate in a court system that is corrupt and unjust and based off of false pretenses and is exploiting and capitalizing upon the suffering of children and domestic violence survivors, I hope that someone tries to speak up, or in the future, because obviously you haven't. And that says a lot for how much pressure is on the people that are involved to just be quiet and play along. So there are multiple forms of funding streams that are going into these agencies. The Guilford County Family Justice Center, under the blanket of the Children's Law Center, and then the second Family Justice Center in High Point. And the dates and the years where these were rolled out really says a lot as it relates to the statistics and the numbers of the state. And based on domestic violence rates, child abuse and neglect rates, reported cases, investigations versus substantiations. So for 2003 to 2013, and this is based on datacenter.kidscount.org and you can go state by state to see how many number total of child abuse, neglect, dependency investigations are available. And there's actually another site that gives you graphs and charts to let you compare the years all together, and you can download it. So from 2003 to 2013, steadily the same number of reports happening. And this is for, Guilford County, Forsyth County, specifically Forsyth, because I focused on that. That's the court jurisdiction where we've been living a nightmare in, as well as other mothers and children. So there was an increase of services not being recommended. But at the same time, there were services being recommended anyway. And there were the number of victims actually being substantiated was shrinking from 2009 to 2013. In 2014, North Carolina enacted a Children's Trust Fund for DSS. So this basically gives them incentive to do services and things like that based on the amount of percentages of abuse and neglected children in their jurisdiction, based on versus the number as a whole of the children in the county. That was alarming when I started looking at that, because the goal there is to keep substantiations low and keep the reports high. At the same time, the funding coming in is coming in from multiple ways just from that, but there's a way that all of this ties together, and that makes it the most insidious part. So the need for services was steadily declining, but the services provided were increasing over time. In 2013 and 14, Guilford County led the state in domestic violence homicides. But then by 2018, right around the time they got their Family Justice Center, the second one, lowest in the state for child abuse. And the number is crazy, going from 5,000 to 400 cases all of a sudden, with only 45 children being abused in the whole entire year of 2018 in Guilford County, right? I'm unclear on when the Children's Law Center and their changing advocacy, meaning they're cutting out what they're mandated by law to do. They're supposed to have a mental health professional and a community volunteer to balance the team effort, as they, laud on their website. Child Abuse Prevention Month. We deal with domestic violence and how they're so concerned, and it's just total blasphemy to me to even look at it. It's just like, wow. So basically, at a certain point, the Children's Law Center had more of an ability to be assigned by Forsyth County courts to be a guardian to the minor child in the event of abuse, neglect, dependency cases, right? Because they advertise as a domestic violence situation, but they call it high conflict, right? They call it a custody battle. And by the dynamic of Forsyth County Court's actions, and in addition to the Children's Law Center's slandering, focus, denial, causative factors of causing conflict and giving the abuser custody no matter what, even though if he's on drugs, they've proven it, he's abused, neglected, molested the children, they haven't seemed to care. I don't know when that started, but I'm sure that someone can figure that out. So the substantiations in Forsyth County have steadily declined, even though the numbers have stayed the same. And we're going back from, let's say, in 2006, Forsyth County had 4,728 reports of child abuse or neglect. 811 of those cases was substantiated. That is 2006. Okay, fast forward to 2018, we've got 4,259 cases, but only 535 were substantiated. So the numbers have decreased of the actual victims who are getting assistance, because if the Children's Law Center is representing children, abuse and neglected children in custody cases, and the court is giving the child to the abusive parent, and services are focusing on investigating the safe parent, there's going to be obviously a lot of conflict. At the same time, DSS is not substantiating any of the reports coming in from these cases, which statistics show that when a woman leaves an abusive situation, especially when she has children, the domestic violence and the risk for death and murder increases exponentially. It doesn't seem that that is the case in Forsyth County, because there is a consistent situation to where women in custody cases are being labeled as having conflict. We're causing the problems. And I say we because there's other mothers, have been blamed, demonized, slandered, belittled, degraded, stripped of all of human decency and rights, and we're paying child support for our children. And we're paying child support because trying to get an abusive man to pay child support will have you chasing him down and arresting him every week like they used to do in the 80s and 90s. Not anymore. We've got mothers now paying child support, and they get funds for that too to match those dollars. So that's just one more incentive to focus on the healthy parent for the investigation, for any kind of support, and for any kind of blame, because she's a woman. We can say she's mentally ill. She's unstable now. And the emotional state from seeing her children abused and neglected, in addition to his stalking and relentless threat of being killed or invaded by this man, by another court action or another thing he does to our children, she's left defenseless. The attorneys are playing ball. It's very clear they're playing ball. Or they're just sabotaging cases. But as well as mothers, protective mothers in Forsyth County Family Court specifically, and I'll just focus on them now, because obviously we have more to talk about in the state of North Carolina with a couple of other counties versus some counties that you can see they're actually helping children in, which aren't any of the ones I've listed. Once a child is given to an abusive parent, the number of reports by the mother who gets minimal visitation, right, or like minor visitation to break her down, to make her feel less confident to come to the court. But at the same time, she's making DSS reports. And if there's real abuse, other people are making reports. And then we have the abuser who likes to make false reports against the mother. So children, they can be billed or have, the child can be counted more than once in a calendar year if there's numerous kinds of abuse or numerous reporters. So that's more funding for each child, each report. But at the same time, they're being prevented from ever being substantiated. And that's the same thing with the Children's Law Center. On their reports, no matter how bad it was about him, they never suggested anything more than 50-50. The GAL reports, despite refusing a drug test, just doing disturbing behavior. He's on drugs, breaking the law, like lying, causing, saying negative things about me in front of her and degrading me. Well, they can both have some custody. That was the final, say in the reports. But that's not what happened. What happened was caused a lot of conflict, and any other mom would have filed an appeal. And maybe would have, or maybe not, been able to get some money up to pay another attorney. I did, and he took mine. But the domestic violence actions by the ex got out of control once he got custody, because my baby was being abused even more and just begging to be with me, which would enrage him. And he was doing more and more terrible things to her, and no one was listening because they weren't going to. The police kind of give the same response. Everyone in Forsyth County, Guilford too, has given the same response. We do not get involved in custody matters. This is a custody battle. This is a high conflict situation. Victim blaming. Blaming a mother for trying to protect her child. Like, we're just equally at fault. Like, in what world do people believe that a mom just sits there and fights with a man in court over the child? A good man would never take a child away from a mother. We can't pretend that these millions of women have lost some of the rights or visitation, or this horrible man is getting custody because there's something wrong with her. That's not the case. She is being exploited, and so are her children, because she is a survivor of domestic violence. They're also getting VAWA funding, Title 4D funding. And I say they, DSS, the police get COPS funding. There's also, let's see, some more funding I found out about. The COPS funding, it's COPS, that pays law enforcement agencies to investigate, to protect, things like that, that comes from the feds. And if they're not protecting and they're not enforcing laws, they don't get any funds. Let's see here. So there's OVW, that's Office of Violence Against Women grants, and there's CAPTA grants, that's Child Abuse Prevention and Child Abuse Prevention Act, I believe. And that is the reason that guardian ad litems came onto the scene ever, based on protecting abused and neglected children. So it's obviously going to be a problem if an abusive man gets a child and the child's being abused, right? Because you can look in the numbers and see at one time it was obvious that it was being taken seriously. At a certain point, it stopped being taken seriously, domestic violence and child abuse regarding custody, specifically in Forsyth County. And then at a certain point, it became capitalized upon. Ira Sunshine and Judge Miller feel invincible. Probably Victor Eisler too. And other people are involved because, I mean, who's going to say anything, right? One of these mentally unstable mothers, oh, she's not well. Don't take her seriously. Sorry to alarm you, or sorry to disappoint you, but here I am. And I guess that's why they went so hard to discredit me throughout numerous situations that I have found in my solitude that I've been afforded by corruption. When you can't be a mother, you're gonna figure out any way you can to be one, if you're a good one. So there's also the North Carolina Department of Public Safety gets domestic violence funding as well. And in Chapter 7B of the North Carolina General Statutes, that's the chapter for abuse, neglect, dependency of a child, the only person in the state of North Carolina that can file a petition for non-secure custody of a child about abuse and neglect is the director of DSS. If that director is not writing these children aren't being removed for that. Although the law does afford law enforcement officers, social workers, medical workers, people like that, to remove a child from an abusive situation until an appropriate guardian or someone on a responsible persons list can be located. But they're not doing that, and they're saying they can't. So I highly suggest any mother in this situation or anything like it in North Carolina or any other state to get into your state laws. In North Carolina, it's the statutes. In West Virginia, it's the code. To get into seeing what are the laws about abuse, neglect, dependency. Also, what are the criminal charges that should be enacted? Because as far as North Carolina, the district attorney of the county is supposed to be directly involved with abuse cases. In addition to the judge and the guardian ad litem and things like that. They're not. They're just outright ignoring it. And I know that, in my case, my ex is an informant, and he's probably their best one, being, a former athlete and being a drug-addicted criminal, con man. I mean, he's probably awesome and doing well for them, and I know that's one more reason they just didn't investigate. But the fact that this whole system was so malicious and so cruel and so just knowingly harmful lets me know that there's a lot of money coming in. And that's why I really am encouraging anyone that even if you're the only mother with the dynamic of the same judge, guardian ad litem, the same DSS worker, the same director, the same county, the same conduct, there's different parts of the complaint would be basically that, say, for example, the Children's Law Center and DSS are getting funding for domestic violence, child abuse prevention, in-home services, high conflict, to assist, in victims and do all these things. And they're supposed to be following protocol, which would cost money for their program. They're supposed to have a therapist, a volunteer, an advocate, attorney, but they're only using an advocate attorney. And instead of following the state and federal laws or, the Hippocratic Oath, they are intentionally creating conflict by giving custody of an abused child whose abuse is never getting actually investigated to an abusive man that we know is a criminal and he's violent based on actual information that can be investigated. In addition to that, he's hurt the child for an extended period of time. If we give him that child, it's going to cause many problems, and let's just hope in the end that nothing happens to this child and the child doesn't get killed. Not really sure where I was going with that, because at this time I'm just overwhelmed with information. But I'm ready to, calling the Office of the Inspector General. Sorry, that was kind of a low-key tangent. Once there are two reports with the same reporter, the same dynamic, that causes a Gone Act audit to begin, and the Office of the Inspector General of the United States is basically like the man over the FBI, the DEA, the DOJ, the BOP, everything you can think of that has to do with the federal government. The Office of the Inspector General is that man over them that audits them and makes sure they're doing what they need to do. So when you're reporting that you're being stalked and raped and your protective orders are being violated and your children are being molested and abused, and these judges are committing fraud and ignoring the law, intentionally creating this conflict, lowering substantiations by never substantiating any child abuse and never stopping the abuse from happening, that's fraud. That's fraud. That's illegal. And I hope that it will be referred to the Department of Justice for RICO charges, so we can take them off of the bench, hold them accountable for what they've been doing. And from what I'm seeing, it is Forsyth, Guilford, and Mecklenburg counties. There's a couple other ones on the list that look pretty suspect. I found numerous documents that give me the actual numbers, but I haven't been able to locate numbers for 19 through 21 yet. Obviously, 21 isn't over. But 18 is a significant year when you look at the numbers. There's also a lot more funding involved. But in order for us to get them to pay attention for what we've been screaming about for all this time, which a lot of us have called these agencies, FBI, DOJ, Civil Rights Division. We've called and called and called, and they're not hearing that. When we're talking about government funds, grants, that are being misused under false pretenses that are actually federal laws being violated by officials and judges, they're going to take notice of that. And with the victims that are incurring this horrible abuse, we have evidence. These are the facts. We don't have to deny facts anymore. We left the abuse. Remember, I don't fall for gaslighting anymore. And at this point, I'm I have no respect for the Forsyth County courthouse or anybody in it. Not really. The district attorney is complicit. They're not investigating. The detectives involved weren't investigating. They've been depravely indifferent to my baby suffering the whole time. I do also want to mention there is a task force for the prevention of child fatalities in the state of North Carolina, and you can find a little bit more about this on Chapter 7B of the North Carolina General Statutes. It's 36 members. A few of them are appointed by the governor. A few of them are in the Senate. And I believe that they would like to know about this if they don't already know, because it's generating such a heavy cash stream, especially in Charlotte. They're doing something major over there. You know, and now I know why I've been a target all this time and why I haven't been able to get any help, any legal assistance, or any safety or protection for my baby. And I'm going to be looking further into it. I really need help on some research because I've got a lot to do, and I'm also, you know, doing short-term things to push these agencies to move while I'm waiting on the feds to do something to get my baby out of there. And I'm sure a lot of you are feeling the same way, having to send your baby back, or knowing that you haven't seen your children in however long because they were kidnapped before forensic interview. And no, I'm not the only one. That's also a crime in the state of North Carolina. If you read through, you know, quite a bit of the North Carolina general statutes, and state and federal laws, really, most of the federal laws are being violated, ignored, like they just don't exist. Like Trump is still president. Not the case anymore. So I'm going to leave it at that. And I try not to get too excited, but sometimes I get a little bit of, you know, excitable about the information that I get, because I'm like, wow, they really thought they were going to get away with this. And I will also end this with a few statistics for you. From 2010 in Guilford County, they had 5,119 investigations for child abuse neglect. 909 were substantiated. Fast forward to 2018. I'm sorry, let's go to 17 because the number for 18 was so low, it's criminal. Let's go to 17. There were 5,464 investigations of child abuse, neglect, and dependency, and there were 644 substantiations. Forsyth County's substantiations have shrunk. Let's see here. No, looks like Forsyth County has had super low, like the lowest in the entire state for substantiations, like 1 out of 1,000 children of investigations, 1 substantiation. Let's see here, 2003. Let me get the computer for a second. So you can actually go on a map and you can hit each county to see, and there's a legend. So I'll go to the year, and let's say 2003 for Forsyth County. 2003, and this is going to be, so we know the reports, the amount of reports haven't changed, but the substantiation. So this is 2003, and substantiated the whole number. And let's go to Forsyth. 426 substantiations in 2003. And Guilford had 986. So that's all the way back in 03. So if you see the difference. And let's look at the total number investigated just to show you it's not that big of a difference. There's total investigations. 3,800, 2,500. And that's 18 years ago. Then you see substantiated. Forsyth has a real problem with substantiating child abuse. And I believe, well, it appears as though the courts, specifically Judge Miller and the Children's Law Center, have jumped on board. And they don't feel that child abuse neglect exists. And I bet as I get into the domestic violence statistics, I'm going to find something of what the same. If we're not addressing domestic violence and child abuse when it becomes the most lethal, meaning when a woman leaves an abuser. What are we doing with all this funding? Where's it going? What is the Children's Law Center and the Family Justice Center actually doing? Is that just for people that don't have any family court matters? I mean, I can only speak for the cases that I know. So, anyway, until next time, y'all have an amazing night.